Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and welcome to the Candice Malcolm Show. Hope everyone is having a great day so far. We have a wonderful show lined up for you today. Now, usually the focus of our show is on Canadian politics and the Canadian news, and we will get to the Canadian news today. But I want to start the show by focusing on a broader trend that we're seeing around the world, and the epicenter of it is in Europe. And I'm talking about the assault on free speech, this idea that somehow there is hate speech out there, there is misinformation and disinformation, and we need government forces to correct the record, to regulate our speech, and to crack down on ideas and opinions that society or government finds inappropriate. And I think that this all came to a head with a speech that was given by Vice President J.D. Vance at the Munich Security Council. So we're going to walk through the speech. We're going to talk about the reaction, some of the really deranged takes when it comes to cheering and celebrating what's happening in countries like Germany by the legacy media, and talk about how it could impact Canada. We're already seeing signs of this sorts of behavior from the Trudeau government, from the Liberals in Canada, and it could possibly be a preview of what is to come in our country. And I'm so pleased today, folks, to be joined by Barbara Kay. She's here for the whole show. Barbara is an author and columnist who has written for many publications, but she's a regular columnist in the National Post, and she always has the most interesting and intelligent takes specifically on Canadian culture and values. So I'm really excited to have her on the show. Barbara, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks, Candice.
And just one quick note to everybody watching: if you're watching the show on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And if you're watching on X, don't forget to share this and repost it. If you're listening as a podcast and you enjoy it, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. All of that really helps us out. It doesn't take you much time, and it really helps us find our audience. Okay, so I want to start with J.D. Vance. This happened last Friday. So he was speaking at the Munich Security Conference in Germany, and he gives a speech, a tremendous speech. I think he's right sort of in the belly of the beast in Europe, going into sort of their environment, going to one of their conferences. And he says something that I think is entirely true, that there's so much consternation and outrage from the establishment elites over this idea that somehow free speech is dangerous. This idea that Elon Musk having X, taking over Twitter and having X, that there's something wrong with it, and somehow it creates a threat to democracy, that when right-wing parties win elections, somehow it's a threat to democracy. So here is a brief clip of J.D. Vance that was really going viral, talking about how expressing your opinion is not a threat to democracy and it's not election interference. Here's that clip.
Expressing opinions isn't election interference. Even when people express views outside your own country, and even when those people are very influential. And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk.
And so, maybe being a little bit provocative there, Barbara, but the idea remains the same. Like I applaud J.D. Vance for going into the environment. This is kind of like how Javier Milei went to the World Economic Forum and spoke at WEF to tell them that what they were doing was wrong and that we needed change and that they should stop demonizing citizens for wanting transparency from corrupt government. So I give J.D. Vance credit for that. And just like to provide more context, so he's talking about the European Union, which is fully trying to enforce regulations and rules over social media. The European Union constantly tries to interfere with these social media platforms, enforcing speech codes, enforcing rules over their platforms. And another story that is happening recently in Germany, they basically, the top security officials banned a right-wing magazine, accusing it of spreading hate. So we're talking about Compact Magazine, which is a magazine that's associated with the political party, the Alternative for Germany, the conservative right-wing party. The magazine was shut down. Okay, the police force went in, raided the offices, raided the staff of the homes, took their computers and everything else. The magazine had a circulation of about 40,000 people, a pretty big publication. And again, the AFD is not like this Alternative for Germany is a radical fringe party. It's a mainstream party, Barbara. It got 16% of the vote in the recent election for the European Parliament, which was the second highest vote count. So we're not talking about like a fringe 1% party. We're talking about a mainstream party. And I think that J.D. Vance going in there and saying that was obviously necessary, given what those parties and what those countries are doing to dissident voices. And again, I mean, we're seeing signs of those sorts of things happening in Canada as well. What's your take on all this?
Well, I think that Germany has, unlike most countries in the world, has a very special relationship with the whole idea of Nazism and people expressing what they consider to be neo-Nazi views. I have a certain sympathy for they do have a Holocaust denial law. You may not deny the Holocaust. I kind of get it in their case. That's a horrible legacy to be walking around with, and you see it playing out in many of their discussions. In terms of the AFD, I think we should make a distinction between some of the members of their party or people that intend to vote for them, and make it clear that they like the party, who are in fact neo-Nazis or who have sympathy or who try to minimize Germany's Holocaust history. People that vote for them is one thing. They should have total freedom of speech, and so should, I suppose, people that are within the party. But those people that have those kind of views within the party, you don't have to shut down their speech, but you do have to get them out of the party. And they do have a few people within the party that are expressing problematic views. If they're smart, they'll, like Marine Le Pen did, you just draw a line and you say, you can't do that in our party. We're not going to shut down the speech of Germans who vote for us. It's unfortunate that they like us, but you could say the same about the left-wing parties. They have some horrible Islamofascists in their party. I mean, not within the party, voting for them. It's the same on both sides. You have terrible people on both sides, extremists at the margins. But that's the distinction I would make.
I think it's important what you mentioned about how Germany obviously has to be careful with their past, and they don't want to go down, past that they had gone down in the past, and drawing a line around, for instance, the Holocaust. That makes sense. It seems to me, though, Barbara, that the consternation, it's being like blown out of proportion, and this idea that you can't, like, to me, when I look at the Alternative for Germany, I see a party kind of based on more ideas that are becoming more mainstream with immigration, saying that we don't want mass open borders. We are worried about crime that comes from refugees. We're worried about people coming that have totally different values. And the fact that a party that is so regularly demonized by the media as being far right, and I take your point that there are some people probably within the margins or that vote for the party that are extremists, that are Nazis, that should be disassociated with the party. But I think the reason why they probably got 16% of the vote is because enough people in the country don't care about those labels anymore. Like, you can call someone far right all day, but if their message resonates with you, and you want to send a message to the elites saying, we don't want this to happen to our country anymore. I think that's what's happening. I want to read a bit more of the reactions to J.D. Vance's speech. So Andrew Coyne, columnist for the Globe and Mail, wrote on X, he said, "Yankee go home. Vance meets with the leader of the far right German party, exports MAGA message." We also had Tom Nuttall from The Economist, who wrote this. He said, "It's hard to overstate the outrage in Munich over J.D. Vance's actions today. A de facto campaign speech on behalf of the AFD 1 week before the election, entirely devoid of substance on security, as Europe craves an understanding of U.S. policy on Ukraine." Then he goes on to say, and some context for my U.S. followers, the AFD is considered sufficiently extreme that parts of the party are under domestic surveillance. And then he says that it's no trivial matter for the VP to meet with them. But I think, to me, Barbara, this underlines the point. The idea that the government has weaponized part of its security apparatus to go after a political party to try to shut down their speech, even though they're what I would call a mainstream party. If you're getting 16% of the vote in a multi-party system, number two out of all the parties, it shouldn't be considered extreme. Them calling it right wing or far right, and them saying that it's under domestic security. To me, that's exactly the kind of thing that warranted JD Vance to be speaking out against it.
I do think there. Yes, I think there is certainly a spectrum that's the trouble when you start to shut down certain kinds of speech that are really disturbing. Then you'll start working your way back to speech that is, I think there are too many immigrants, which is obviously should be not totally uncontroversial, and isn't. The leader of the AFD is Alice Vidal. She is herself a lesbian. Her partner is from Sri Lanka. I mean, I don't think that she is going to be calling for all non-ethnic Germans to be leaving the country anytime soon. So yes, I agree with you that to be terribly frightened about I think you should look at their policies, and if their actual policies don't seem to be terribly different from a lot of Republican policies in the United States. So I think it's unfair to keep calling the AFD far right, far right, far right. Like they every time they mention that party, there's there's always that attached to it. Although nobody ever says the far left Democrats, even though a lot of Democrats within the party are extremely far left. And even in the Republican Party, there are some far right. There's like Marjorie Greene. I mean, there are far right extremists. So I think you have to watch what the policies are, and if all those people are supporting them, then you have to take a good look at why they can't find what they're looking for in the other parties, which are completely normal things like too much immigration and all of that.
Right. And so on top of all of this is an amusing thing that happened. So the American news network, CBS, has a show called 60 Minutes. It's one of the best media and journalism shows that has existed for decades. And they go in right at the same time and do a special on German prosecutors who are cracking down on free speech. So, we had the JD Vance speech, everybody's talked about it, making headlines over the weekend. And then on Sunday, CBS airs the 60-minute clip. Barbara, it is unbelievable to me, this segment, right? So the premise is that in Germany, it is a crime to insult people, and it is a crime to lie online, even if you don't even know that you're lying. And so CBS covers this, but not in a critical way at all. They're basically cheerleading this idea that in Germany, the police can go after people online. I didn't sense a little, even a hint of criticism or skepticism towards these activities by the German prosecutors that, from a North American mind, it's like, it's wild that they're doing this. And to have a journalists are supposed to advocate for free speech and believe in it as a good. I'm going to show this clip. So this is what it looked like. A CBS reporter, Chiron Alfonsi, talking to the German prosecutors. What they're saying is wild, and her reaction, like not to push back, not to question it, not to be skeptical, but just to go, oh, wow, that's interesting. Really something to behold. So let's play that clip.
Is it a crime to insult somebody in public?
Yes, it is.
And it's a crime to insult them online as well?
Yes. The fine could be even higher if you insult someone in the internet.
Why?
Because in internet, it stays there.
If somebody posts something that's not true, and then somebody else reposts it or likes it, are they committing a crime?
Yeah, in the case of reposting, it is a crime as well, because the reader can't distinguish whether you just invented this or just reposted it. That's the same for us.
And so from this interview where, they say, yes, saying mean things about politicians is against the law in Germany. You cannot say it. And it's even worse to do it online. So from there, Barbara, we get to see a CBS camera crew join the German police as they raid somebody's house, again, for the crime of posting a meme on the internet that the government didn't like. Let's play that clip.
It's 6:01 on a Tuesday morning, and we were with state police as they raided this apartment in northwest Germany. Inside, 6 armed officers searched a suspect's home, then seized his laptop and cell phone. Prosecutors say those electronics may have been used to commit a crime. The crime, posting a racist cartoon online.
And so I guess this is nothing new. We've seen this kind of thing happening in the UK. Possibly it'll come to Canada soon. But the thing that really blows my mind, Barbara, is to hear the giddy CBS reporter talking about it. Like, here we are raiding this house, knocking down the door with our police squad here to arrest this person for a meme that we didn't like.
It's pretty creepy. It's pretty creepy. I think there are similar laws in the UK. I've seen some same kind of footage, somebody being arrested for having made some, it wasn't even, I mean, it was a very nothing comment on the internet, and the whole SWAT team arrives and sees him and his computer. Or the woman who was arrested in England, in London, for praying silently outside an abortion clinic. She wasn't even moving her lips. I mean, and she was arrested for doing that. Yes, I think free speech is in dire trouble in Europe and the UK, and I don't think that what J.D. Vance said was so harsh at all. I think it was pretty transparent, strong, but I heard that some members of the audience were actually weeping at what he had to say. So it does give you a portrait of a Europe that really, what's happened to their values, what's happened to their if this is what they have to stoop to, and they don't even define insult. I find it very disturbing when somebody won't automatically define what they mean. Well, when I say insult, I don't mean, oh, you looked fat on TV today or something like that. I mean, that it has to. It could be anything. It could be anything that you say that it's taken. It's the person who decides, right? The person who feels insulted that decides. This is a very slippery slope. There's no question.
Well, it's interesting because I think that so many people, including sort of elites in North America and Canada and the US, sort of believe that Europeans are more enlightened or more sophisticated in their political views than us in North America, and they kind of look to Europe like we should be more like them. I just when I look at what's happening in Europe, I mean, the fact that they're cracking down on speech like this, the fact that they've completely opened their borders and flooded it with migrants that many cases aren't well suited to live in the West. They're kind of giving it all away. And to me, it's kind of a terrifying idea that you have someone like Mark Carney, who identifies himself as European, who has this sophisticated views. Like, we need to be more like the Europeans. I think it's the exact opposite. It's frightening, and I think that Canada should do everything it can to move away from this kind of speech regulations and codes and trying to censor the internet.
Oh, absolutely. What galls me, of course, and many other Canadians, is that they talk a lot about our speech, but they don't seem to care much when you hear speech in our streets, in violent demonstrations of the worst kind of hatred, that true Nazi style violent speech that is insightful and that is absolutely totally unacceptable, and even by the criminal code is considered incitement to violence. Those people are not arrested in their homes, or they don't get SWAT teams. They don't go to jail, most of them. So the hypocrisy, the double standards are disturbing to me as well.
Okay, I have one more thing from CBS, and again to do with Germany. So on the same evening, Sunday evening, we had CBS News's Margaret Brenner on her show Face the Nation. She was on with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And she makes quite a bizarre statement, Barbara. She says that free speech was weaponized in Nazi Germany, and that is what caused the Holocaust. Marco Rubio very, very calmly and very correctly sets the record straight here. But let's play this clip, and then I'll have you react to it, Barbara.
He was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views. and some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that was changing the tone of it. And you know that the censorship
I have to disagree with
was
you.
specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. There was none.
Well, and it's even more interesting than that because it was actually censorship laws in the Weimar Republic that in many ways led to the rise of Nazism because they had such strict codes on speech in Germany between the First and Second World War. So I just want to play a quick clip. This is from an organization called FIRE, the Foundation for, I think it's Independent Research and Education, an American free speech group. They this clip started circulating. It was from a year or two ago. But here we have basically a scholar at a FIRE senior fellow, Nadim Strawson, explaining how the history of censorship actually made anti-Semitism much worse, and it paved the way for the Nazis. Let's play that clip.
We obviously know that despite the speech suppression, the punishment of speech, it was hardly effective in preventing the rise of Nazism. To the contrary, the Nazis themselves, as well as many historians, believe that the net impact of those laws censoring Nazi speech was to amplify their message.
So Megan Brenner was completely wrong. The exact opposite, actually. The things that they're doing today to censor, you could argue, led more to the rise of Nazis than this idea that somehow Nazi Germany was like a free speech utopia, and that's how they managed to carry out the slaughter. What was your take on all that, Barbara?
I think you're absolutely right. She's very wrong about by the time the Nazis gained power, everybody was very careful of what they were. I mean, they had absolute control, and the punishment could be quite dire if you expressed hatred of them or criticism of them. So she was totally off base there, and I do believe that the second speaker, Nadine Strawson, was right in that the more you try to suppress certain things, the more pushback you're going to get. And if it's a free society and people can vote, they will vote against you. You just look at our past history in the last 9 years of people that weren't allowed to say what they felt about issues, gender, and I mean, the whole DEI thing is suppression of speech, cancel culture, all of that. And they are reaping, the Liberal Party has reaped their just reward in becoming more and more unpopular. And it's largely due to, and the same in the United States, and accounts for Trump's victory. A lot of it was cultural. People were tired of, having to keep their mouth shut about this, that, and the other. And that was their form of rebellion. And who can blame them?
Well, I hope you're right. I hope that this leads us away from this regime of the online harms bill that Justin Trudeau and his government are introducing, along with a whole host of other regulations and legislation designed to try to regulate the internet, to try to crack down on so-called hate speech or misinformation, terms that are always very vaguely defined, Barbara. I want to pivot now to talk about Pierre Poilievre, because he gave a speech on Saturday night, and we did discuss it on the show on Monday, but I think that there was so much to the speech that it's worth going through it in a little more depth, and also just to talk about this moment, right? Because here we are in 2025, all of a sudden, patriotism and Canadian pride are back in style after 5 years or even longer of liberals and elitists and left-wingers saying that there's something disgraceful about Canada, that Canada's genocidal, that there's shame in being Canadian, that we shouldn't celebrate Canada Day, we should have our flags at half-staff, all this stuff. And then now all of a sudden, Donald Trump, makes an offhand comment and proposes a trade tariff, and suddenly, you have people policing products in supermarkets, saying don't buy American goods, buy the Canadian goods, and suddenly everyone wants to fly the Maple Leaf again. So in that context, we had Pierre Poilievre give us a very strong speech on Saturday evening. He held his Canada First rally. This was on the anniversary of the 60th anniversary of the Maple Leaf flag being introduced in Canada. So he held the event in Ottawa. Hundreds of thousands of people were watching it live online. We had, I think, upwards of 10,000 people in person watching this event. And I mean, you can just see the visuals of it, Barbara, before we get into the context of it. It looked beautiful, right? This beautiful big flag, this kind of like youthful candidate with his beautiful wife. They come out. You had Anna Poilievre give an amazing introduction. She's an inspiring person herself. Yes. And then she introduces her husband. And I really appreciated the way he started out the speech. He sort of made a self-deprecating joke saying, you know, everybody always asks, like, what is she doing with him? Which was very like humble and sweet. And so, you know, just without even talking about the content, just the way it looked, I think that it really kind of breathed a lot of energy into the conservative side when it comes to Canadian patriotism. Conservatives were the one that maintained our patriotism throughout the last 10 years, while the Liberals were telling us not to do it. And so it was kind of nice to see him maintain that. So I'll go to you. Like, what was your overall takeaway from the speech there?
I did love his speech, and I actually posted it on X and said I think it was the best political speech I ever heard. And I agree, the visuals were great. I think that his choice to kind of echo the America First, you know, Donald Trump's America First message with Canada First was bold, but he did it with class, and he did it, you know, he sort of got above the fray doing it, and I thought he did it very well. I loved the speech. I thought the trajectory of the speech, he took us on a journey, and that's what a good speech should do. And he elicited many, many different reactions. He certainly, in me, and I've seen a lot of speeches in my time, and I'm generally sitting back and listening. I like that. I don't like that. But this time, I sort of got carried away. Not carried away, but I got carried along by his very, very well constructed, very well crafted, a journey of ideas and emotions intertwined. And I thought he did a brilliant job. And he started off with the personal, as one should. And by the way, I think all of it was calculated. He was not only speaking to Canadians, he was speaking to Donald Trump, but he was also speaking to Mark Carney. So he had a triple message, and it had to be effective on many different levels. So he began with the personal. He and his wife. His wife is an immigrant and came to this country, and he is from very ordinary, you know, kind of up from poverty background. And the message here was, we're not elite. We don't come from privilege like Mark Carney, but we know that we knew that Canada would keep its promise to us. Anna came to Canada because she believed in Canada's promise, and he said Canada kept its promise to us. So we are products of a Canada that is a good place, a great country. So the whole thing is going to get back to how can we recapture the greatness of Canada. So he set it up as that. And then he moves into, but presently we're under threat. So now we're getting a little nervous. What is the threat? And he explains the threat. We know what the threat is, but we can do something about that. So, you know, don't worry. We can deal with that threat. Yes. We have energy. We have leverage. Don't be afraid. That's the next message. Then the next one is a statement to the American people. He does not mention Donald Trump by name through most of his speech. He goes above Trump and talks directly to the American people. And he says, you Americans, we are both suffering. We are both going to suffer. And he says, you know, so we're together on this. We should not be enemies. We're together. We can fix this. We're not asking for pity. And then on to our shared history. Who would you rather have as a neighbor? We have great shared history, military, blah, blah, blah. Now he gets into a warning. We will never be the 51st state. And now he's starting to sort of come out like with the gloves on. We will bear any burden. He still hasn't mentioned Donald Trump. Now it's we are going to be the road ahead. We are going to be the wealthiest country. But now he's pivoting to Carney and Trudeau and all our problems that they created. And now here's the list of problems: energy, homes, taxes, all those. Now we pivot to the Conservatives. We were right about everything. We knew what those problems were. We have a solution to fix them. So we were right, they were wrong. And he's now including, from now on, everything is Carney Trudeau, Carney Trudeau, Carney Trudeau. The media, they were wrong about us, and they said this, not true. Then it's on to be afraid of Mark Carney. Not only afraid, you don't have to be just afraid of Donald Trump. You have to be afraid of Mark Carney too, and here's why. And in a sense, Carney's moving his headquarters to New York. So actually, Carney and Donald Trump, they have a certain amount of certain things in common, but it's the first mention of Donald Trump's name. And then he has a very strong, it's a bit scary, very strong paragraph. He says, Mark Carney's going to plagiarize all our stuff. And he put his profit before our people. If he wins, Canada loses. This is, I think, a very strong statement, but don't be afraid. Now we move into his bring it home economic plan. And the detail and precision is really excellent because Carney is not talking in precision, in details or being precise at all. Sorry, I'm rambling on and on, but
No, it's okay.
now we get into, trade barriers and the border security and the fentanyl. He can be tough. We're going to have harsher punishments, but he has compassion because we're going to deal with treatment. Now it's defense and wasteful aid to, there's so many policy things that he's covering here. I think that's remarkable in a speech like this where he's really putting out a very full platform. Now we're coming to the climax: patriotism, citizenship. We're going to end cancel culture. We're going to end the war on history. We are the greatest country in the world. We're going to reinstate statues. The details are fantastic. We're going to bring back our proud military traditions. We're going to promote now, this I liked a lot. Oh, now we're into inspiration. So we're very climactic here. We're into inspiration for what's going to be. Here's my tactics. We're going to promote common national identity. We're going to bridge differences rather than create differences. And he talks about our citizenship is precious. I loved what he said when he said, we're going to have a new part of the citizenship oath. We're going to have in-person citizenship. Isn't it awful that we got to the point where we actually, it's like, oh yeah, we'll just zoom it in here. Well, we'll send your certificate by email. Really? In-person citizenship oaths, and added to the oath will be the theme of gratitude. Gratitude for being part of the greatest country in the world. And you should know that, and you should express it in words. You have to say so. And then he says you have to leave your hate behind, whatever your hate. And he names a whole bunch of names to indicate all the different ethnic, sources of hatred in the world. And he says, leave it behind. You are Canadian first. This is a fantastic message. And then now back to the summary, but it's a great summary because he adds a new thought to it. He reprises much as what he said in the speech, but then he adds something very new. And he says, a warning. It's not going to be easy to re-achieve the Canadian promise. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be hard. But what's going to help us in that journey? The past is going to teach us how to be strong in bearing the burden of what, to get back to our Canadian promise. And then he mentions, do you think it was easy for the Indigenous people to live in minus 30 or 40 degree and build their igloos and what about immigrants who built the railway? What about the military and the world wars? And what about individuals like Terry Fox? We are part of something bigger than ourselves, he said. This is beautiful because who made Canada? And he just lists everybody, including brave, courageous individuals with a strong message. of hope and everything else that you want to hear. I thought it was a brilliant speech. I felt myself going with him. I thought he took me along, and I was willing to suspend any kind of, like there was no point at which I said, wait a minute, hey, now you're getting corny, or now you're getting, this is you're promising too much, or any of that. So yes, I loved it, as you can see.
Well, no, I loved the story that you told about it, and you really made some clear points that I hadn't even really thought about. I think you're right when it comes to, this is an alternative to the 9 years of Liberals that we can all look forward to. We can all get excited about. I have the blueprint. I have the plan. And it's not something new. He didn't just come up with it in the wake of the tariff threats from President Trump. These are the things that he's been talking about and advocating for his entire career. And I do agree that those are the least the least that we can do. Those are the first steps towards regaining our country, taking back our country, and restoring it. I think that it's also interesting, just to add a point, that the legacy media will claim that Pierre Poilievre doesn't have a plan, that he doesn't have depth, that he just speaks in talking points and bumper stickers. And that's sort of what the Liberals have said as well, Mark Carney. But here you have, Pierre Poilievre get up on a Saturday night and speak in great detail for an hour and a half about his plans and his policies, in really even telling us how he's going to pay for them, right? Like, yes, I'm going to beef up our military. We're going to start patrolling the Arctic. We're going to build in the North, and I'm going to pay for it by defunding foreign aid and defunding UNRWA. And here you go. Here's how I'm going to pay for it. And then you can contrast that with Mark Carney, who everybody thinks is super smart and sophisticated, but he hasn't given a plan at all. And the few points that he's put out there often seem to contradict each other. Like will he get rid of the carbon tax? No, it's going to be changed to an industrial thing that he says that won't trickle down to consumers, but then he has to admit that, yes, it is the consumers that will pay more. He has a very limited and confused policy right now. I just want to go back to Pierre Poilievre because I agree with you. And I think that some of the ideas like citizenship ceremonies in person, yes, obviously, I love the idea of adding gratitude. In some ways, it felt a little bit like it was too little too late, though, Barbara. I think that part of the problem with the Trudeau government is that they completely opened the gate and anyone could become a citizen. And I've been critical of this since Trudeau came to office. So one of the first things he did when he became prime minister back in 2015 is he changed the citizenship laws. He made it so that you can become a citizen basically fast-tracked after just 4 years. And you don't even have to live in Canada full time to become a citizen. So he's given citizenship away, which has cheapened it for all of us.
I agree.
And I didn't hear even, so I sat down with Pierre Poilievre last week and I asked him about his immigration plan. He said it would look a lot more like the Harper government, but he didn't give me specifics. And one of the things I'm worried about is the changes that have happened to our country over the last 9 years, with people not really caring about Canada, people being able to become citizens of our country without showing any kind of love for Canada, any kind of respect for Canada. There's one part in the speech, and I'm going to play it, and I'll get you to react. This was making the rounds a lot, sort of on the more like right-wing circles online by kind of more Canadian nationalists who took issue with this one clip. So, Sean, this is clip number 8. Pierre Poilievre says that our nationalism is not based on bloodlines, birthplace, or backgrounds. Let's play that clip.
Ours is a nationalism not based on bloodlines, birthplace, or background. Whether your name is Martin or Mohammed, Poilievre or Patel. Tremblay. Hi there, Mr. Patel. Good to see you. It's like Smith. Or like Tremblay. Tremblay, Tang, Singh, Smith, or Steinberg. Whether you're from Tuktoyaktuk or Trois-Rivières, Okanagan or Armagh, Calgary or Cavendish, we are all Canadians and Canadians first.
I think it was a little charming how he said that and how he talked about Mr. Patel. But my issue here is it's starting to sound a little bit like Trudeau's post-national, everyone's a Canadian, Canadian's nothing, Canadian's a Canadian's Canadian. If you say that our nationalism is not based on bloodlines, birthplace, or background, I mean, it has to be based on one of those three, right? I mean, what is Canadian if it has nothing to do with like who your family and who your parents were, where you're born, your background? I like to me, there needs to be more to that. You have to say, in order to be Canadian, you can come from these other places, but you have to commit to Canada. You have to believe in Canada. You have to, and I just think there could have been a lot more that he had added to that bit. What do you think?
He could have doubled down on it. I drew from what he said that bloodlines should not be important on that you can become Canadian. I think partly he was saying that with like his wife is an immigrant. I mean, she's from Venezuela. That doesn't mean she's not Canadian. She became Canadian because she joined the common culture. And I think maybe he should have, all right, he could have emphasized that. We have a common culture. It was built by, people from all over, people who built the railways and people, indigenous people. Like, I mean, he said it, but he said it in a kind of a roundabout way, is that we became who we were by all these different energies and forces. He could have said, we began as a common culture based on British values. I mean, we're, heritage values, British and French because of. But I think by now, all these years later, that I don't know if that would have gone over very well, even with heritage Canadians. I don't think any heritage Canadian has a problem with somebody from Venezuela or from India or from China or anywhere who becomes very Canadian. And I know lots of people from other places. They love Canada. If you love Canada and you love the reason that if you came to Canada to have freedom and an opportunity and for the Canadian promise, then you've already acknowledged, if you don't have, doesn't have to be in words, you have acknowledged that Canada has what you're not getting where you came from. Whether that maybe that should be more explicit, but then it might sound a little bit patronizing or mean-spirited to, say it, but yeah, I mean, I think he said to me, it seemed like we have a common culture and we will be stronger for all the people that come from different places if they leave whatever was bugging them about other people behind, leave your hatred behind, and bring your best self to Canada and internalize our common culture that gave us the Canadian promise and that fulfilled it for me and my wife. Like, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that was my takeaway from it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
That's what I wanted him. Maybe that's what I wanted him to be saying. I don't know.
Well, I think if you show the clip that I just did completely out of context, you could see, hey, well, wait a minute, like what does it mean to be Canadian if anyone can be Canadian, anyone can come here, and it doesn't matter like anything about you. But I think, together with the other points that you raised about how he wants people to do citizenship ceremonies and he wants to bring in gratitude. And he tells you that if you come from a war-torn place, don't bring your tribal hatreds to Canada, like leave that all away. I think that all that tied together does tell that kind of positive patriotism that we do have shared values. We're not a multicultural utopia where Mark Carney says this a lot, that the Americans are a melting pot and that Canada is a mosaic.
Well, that's a very old paradigm.
Right. No, and I'm saying like that. I used to hear that maybe 20 years ago, and I never liked it, right? Because the idea is that with a melting pot, every culture comes together and it changes the flavor, right? So it's not just like you have to become British, or in the US you have to become American, and then everything else gets melted away. It's like every culture that comes changes America a little bit, and we're all together in this stew. I like that metaphor better than a mosaic. Too. A mosaic where you can just cut out somebody and each piece is completely separate and removed from every other piece. I mean, Mark Carney says that, and I think he has a positive, 20 years ago, people used to say it. but to me it's very negative. It's like we live in these silos. You don't have to interact with anybody. You can actually hate the person in the picture next door to you. It doesn't matter. You don't have anything in common. You just happen to be side by side, which I think is the sort of like liberal idea of Canada. That Canada, I think Jan Martel once said Canada is the world's greatest hotel. This idea that like you can just come and stay and go and it doesn't mean anything, and like a hotel doesn't have any warmth. It's not a home. It's just a place you come and go. And I think
it's the old good intentions thing. It's the old good intentions thing. Is that we can remain who we were, and at the same time be totally Canadian. It was the beginning of multiculturalism, and I had the same reaction as you when I would hear that. Mosaic. Well, that's kind of like chopped up little tiles, like I would see a bathroom wall, and I liked the melting pot thing because I think that's the only way you're going to get true patriotism is when people say American culture, they kind of know what they mean. They may not love the culture, but they kind of know that those waves of immigration, and the Italians and the Irish and the Jews and the this and the that, they had tough beginnings. They were very rough. It was a rough process. So many hundreds of thousands of people coming, but they said, "No, you're going to become American." They were very adamant about it, and people did. By the second, third generation, everybody became very happy to say they were proud Americans. So this Mosaic idea is, no, the most important thing about you is the identity you were before you came here. So don't lose that. So we'll just we'll fit you in. We'll the caulking will be like between us all, and that'll be the bridge. But no, it doesn't work. And we thought it would work. I think a lot of people thought multiculturalism would work. It didn't work, and it didn't work in a very dramatic fashion in Europe, and the UK and in other places. It's very bad. So
okay, well, Barbara, I'm going to ask you one last question, and it might lead to a broader conversation. So if it does, we might have to save it for the next time you join the show. But I think that with President Trump's tariff threats, this whole newfound patriotism, love of country on the political left and in the center, it kind of raises old questions when you think of what it is to be Canadian. What do we love about Canada? Justin Trudeau defined Canada twice on U.S. television earlier this year as a Canadian is defined as just not an American. You wrote on X, and this was, I think, one of your typically very thought-provoking, controversial takes. You wrote that if Quebec officially left Confederation and became a nation, Canada would cease to exist as a nation. Montreal is a port city, a big advantage. Quebec has natural resources, strong sense of its own identity. It would survive and could easily flourish under certain circumstances. Be careful what you wish for. So I think you're saying that the Canadian identity, the French are the ones that have the identity more so than us English Canadians, and maybe we can learn a bit about them. You wrote that before all of the tariff threats and the 51st state thing. So what's your current thinking on this?
Well, my current thinking is that there's going to be a big pause in the whole rush for, I don't think this will be very good for the Parti Québécois. At the time that I wrote that, they were quite ascendant in the polls, and Premier Legault was like behind the eight ball. But I think that the tariff thing may change it. But what I meant by that was, I've lived in Montreal for like over 60 years. And I've had my ups and downs with Quebec, and I've gone back and forth on a lot of things. But I can say this: because they speak French, and because a lot of their influences, their journalists and their intellectuals, they don't take their marching orders from North America's, whatever's going on here, and multiculturalism and all of that. I think they were a little bit immunized from that. They feel like a nation. They say they are a nation. I think in all the respects that matter, they are a nation, diluted because so many of them, the church has been absent for a long time, for most of their lives. But still, they don't need threats of tariffs or anything else. They feel threatened all the time because of the language and they feel like they're an island in a sea of. So they've had that for a long time. When people said that they were racist because of the Bill 21, with the niqab law and not wearing a hijab in classes and all that, they were wrong. They were protecting their culture, and that's still very important to them. And they would retain. And I think if they did separate, they have so many natural blessings that they would remain they would remain a nation, but the rest of Canada would be like, now what? What do we do? What do we do? We have this gigantic hole in the middle of our country. I think that would be a tragedy for the rest of Canada, far greater than it would be for Quebec. I think Quebec would actually get their act together, and they'd have to overcome a lot of things, like they've got all, I won't even start to go into it, all the compromises that have to be made. But the fact is, people think that they would flop, but no, I don't think they would. I don't think they would. I think they have an inner moral, I think they have an inner sense of who they are, much more than many Canadians.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with you, Barbara. I think that particularly from an economic standpoint, it's hard to imagine how they could function as a government. I think it's to the contrary. If Alberta were to separate from Canada, the rest of the country would go bankrupt because basically Alberta's resources prop up socialism in the rest of the country and allow, the proliferation of government spending throughout the economy. As same goes with the American security apparatus. Like if we actually had to secure our own borders and we lost the sort of nuclear umbrella provided by the Americans, I don't think that Canada could have such a generous welfare state. And that's
true. That is
so
true.
much of a part of the identity. So I think that
economically, wouldn't you say that Quebec, they have untapped natural resources, minerals, rare earths, like all kinds of incredible stuff still in the ground, and the electricity they supply the northern states with, incredible hydro, which means that they could say no to oil and a lot of stuff that other provinces can't. I think it has incredible wealth, and it's a port city. Port cities always thrive.
But there'd have to be a will to actually develop the natural resources, which, there's been quotes from Quebec premiers going back saying that, like, why would we develop our natural resources? We don't need to. But
if they were going to be a separate country, that would be, I guess we need to now. They would need to.
Yeah, and well, maybe that would cause them to sort of look at the fiscal picture a little differently, because I think without all the transfer payments, Quebec would never have a balanced budget. It's a super interesting thought experiment, and I think that you're right when it comes to understanding their identity and protecting their culture. Quebec is ahead of the rest of Canada. We can learn a lot, us English Canadians, from our French Canadian counterparts. So, Barbara, we'll leave it there. We'll have to have you back again to further the discussion and the conversation again. But it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Candice. Always a pleasure for me to be here.
All right. So we will leave it at that today. I'm your host, Candice Malcolm. This is the Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back again tomorrow with all the news. Thank you and God bless.